Now, across Texas, the issue is.
I'm Stephen Dial in Dallas.
I'm Rudy Koski in Austin, and this is Texas, the issue is.
Our colleague Greg Grugan is out this week. The Texas legislative session is in the books, and it was full of action. I talked to a Republican and a Democrat from the House and Senate about the wins and losses. Senator West, you've seen a lot of sessions. You don't want to say you've had more sessions than my age, but you've seen a lot of sessions. How would you grade this one?
This has been one of the most difficult ones I've participated in.
While State Senator Royce West called this session difficult, he highlighted bipartisan wins, like public education funding.
You can always argue about the basic allotment, but the Senate's approach was restructuring the way that we finance public schools. We added additional allotments. One of the biggest issues we heard about, aside from making certain our teachers were able to get an adequate raise, was making certain that schools were able to take care of some of their fixed costs, their operational costs. And so we put an additional allotment in to make certain that every legislative session, we've got to look at the operational costs of districts and make certain that we put money into that allotment. And when I say allotment, into that bucket. And that money then is spread throughout the entire state of Texas.
What the problem is people are not often given the full story. So for example, on school choice, what they're not telling you, the people that are bragging about this so-called universal school choice program, they're not telling you that it only applies to 1% of Texas students. And they're also not telling you that they had to give the teacher unions a $9 billion bribe just to get this little $1 billion, small school choice program off the ground.
I also got a post-session interview with Representative Brian Harrison. You kind of, you made a name for yourself this session. I don't know if you may like what some people may have seen. Why were you so opposed to a lot of things this session?
Unfortunately, the Texas legislature this session basically said they are happy to continue taxing Texans out of their homes to fund a continuation of the Biden agenda, to burn the $24 billion surplus, and instead of giving it back to taxpayers in the form of property tax relief or to start eliminating property taxes, to fund every left-wing progressive ideology under the sun.
Another heated topic is Senate Bill 3, a total ban on non-medical THC. The VFW and other groups have urged the governor to veto the bill. This is what Abbott said about SB 3 on Tuesday.
It is one of literally more than 1,000 bills on my desk, all of which need my careful consideration and evaluation, and I will give all of those pieces of legislation the consideration and time that they deserve.
As a dad, how do you feel about the fact
Very nice twist to the question. You're still not going to get an answer.
West and Harrison are on different sides of this issue. They told me why they are confident with how they voted. Why do you think Governor Abbott should sign SB 3, the THC ban, into law?
And I think that the evidence is kind of overwhelming in terms of we're seeing THC stores, we're seeing stores pop up on every corner with THC as one of the main products of those stores. And we're seeing kids utilizing THC products. And the fact is that we want them to pop up on every corner like liquor stores. I don't want that.
Why do you think Democrats and Republicans are torn on this issue?
I agree with the goal of protecting children from potentially dangerous products. Everybody agrees with that. But that's not what this bill did. This bill bans all these hemp products that stop what Texas adults, many either want or rely on these products. And what it's going to do, it's going to have a devastating impact on our economy. It's going to shut 8, 9, 10,000 small businesses are going to have to close their doors. 40, 50,000 jobs are going to get laid off, and millions of Texans are going to be faced with a choice and basically pushed into either a completely unregulated, dangerous black market or to much more fatal and addictive pharmaceuticals. Why would we do such a thing?
All right, it was a lot to unpack in that interview. My word, Rudy, I mean, I want to say recess because now it's over. I don't think they're going to go to special session. What's your one word?
Oh boy, I hope that recess is right and not a special session. All right, since we had two individuals that we spoke to, I'm going to go with the two-word one, and it's Boris and Natasha.
I'm sure you will explain that. All right. When we come back, we'll be joined by Rice University political scientist Mark Jones. Stay on the other side of this break. All right, we are back. It's not the Fox Texas Trio, but it's the next best thing. We're joined by Rice University political scientist Mark Jones. Rudy, you got first up to bat. What do you make of this legislative session?
You know, Stephen, I have to agree with the assessment made by Representative Harrison, the one that he gave you and the one that he gave me when we spoke right before the session ended, and that this is probably the least physically conservative session I've covered in more than 2 decades. A lot of money was thrown out this session, and a lot of that cash, according to some analysts, may be a ticking time bomb, the kind of bomb that cartoon characters Boris and Natasha hold when they try to blow up Bullwinkle and Rocky, and instead they're the ones that get blasted. Well, here's some of the big ticket item expenditures that we had, and something to chew on. Lawmakers increased the homestead exemption again. It's so big that some seniors may not get taxed. That's a lot of school cash funding that's going to have to be replaced. The budget surplus also helped this time, and Harrison believes a bulk of that surplus should have been returned to taxpayers, as he mentioned in our interview just then. Other big payouts include money for the new school choice plan and money to build a new water infrastructure plan. An economic downturn could turn all that into a ticking time bomb, but this time not for Boris and Natasha, but for state lawmakers and all of us here in Texas. There could be a deep financial crater waiting for us all in the next session, Stephen.
Mark, what's your take?
Well, I agree with Rudy that 2027 could be a day or a year of reckoning for the Texas legislature if the economy doesn't continue to be robust. I thought what was most interesting about this session were 2 things. One was Dustin Burrows was elected with minority Republican support over the official caucus nominee David Cook from Mansfield, Burrows had majority Democratic support. So potentially we're looking at a speaker that was going to be effectively dependent on Democrats and weak on conservative legislation, but we didn't see that at all. What we saw was a legislature where pretty much all of the conservative legislation that came out of the Senate, with a few exceptions, passed through the House and became law. And we saw Dustin Burrows very much not only consolidate his support and essentially position as Speaker of the Texas House, but also protect most of his supporters from potential 2026 primary challenges. Because if you're trying to look for legislation that's conservative and didn't pass, that most Republicans really wanted to pass, there just really aren't that many bills out there. And by the same token, Democrats, I think at the start of the session, thought that they were going to have far more influence than they actually had. Other than some individual benefits like vice chair positions or specific bills that were near and dear to them passing, there wasn't much that the collective Democratic Party got out of their deal with Dustin Burrows to make him Speaker.
Rudy Koski, bipartisan bills that will become law on, Governor Abbott's already signed public education funding, bipartisan bill on water, bipartisan bill on bail reform. Was it a successful session for Democrats, in your opinion?
No, not at all. The game against the Democrats, was rigged from the very beginning. I'll agree and echo a little bit of what Mark just said. And it was, rigged, especially in regards to school choice, right? Democrats were faced with the same old decision that they've been faced with for decades now: work for a compromise or just dig in. Now, as you mentioned, Stephen, there were some bipartisan bills, but obstruction, that remains the main play in their legislative playbook. And unfortunately, like a prevent defense in football, it's a strategy that sometimes leads to a bitter loss. Democrats dug in on several big social and crime issues during the session, things like defending drag show performances in front of kids, voting against defining a man and a woman, pushing back on a big chunk of bail reform. All that plays well with their party base, but it will not help them in a statewide election. As midterm elections approach, you can bet that these issues, are going to move out from under the Capitol dome and onto the campaign trail, Stephen.
Mark, quick answer. We got about 20 seconds left. Do you think Democrats had any major wins this session?
Not really. I think the best they can hope for is that they watered down just a little bit some conservative legislation, but it pales to the success that they enjoyed under Dade Phelan or under Speaker Joe Straus in the past.
Okay, I mentioned a moment ago how Democrats push back on bail reform. When we come back, we'll talk about how that issue has already launched an effort at some political payback. Okay, welcome back to Texas. The issue is a major bail reform package was signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott, but that emergency priority did not include two key proposals. One would have prohibited bail for undocumented immigrants who commit violent crimes, and the other was a very broad approach to denying bail. The two were constitutional amendments and needed 100 votes to get them to the November ballot. Didn't happen. They were blocked by Democrats, and this past Tuesday, at a signing ceremony for the bail reform legislation that did survive, the no votes were called out.
People are getting tired of being killed. It's simply that. People are being slaughtered in Harris County, and by people that government already has confined and then released. That travesty ends today.
There were two bills, Senate Bill SJR 87 and SJR 1, that did not pass. We were within, what, 2 or 3 votes, Governor? 3 votes. And he called out a name of a DA who let a murderer out. We've called out names of judges who don't even work and let murderers out. I want the voters in these districts to call their Democrat members and say, Alma Allen, Anna Hernandez, Ann Johnson, Morales, Rosenthal, Simmons, Thompson, Wally, Ward, Hubert Vo, Gene Wu. Where are those Democrats to not stand for the crime victims in this county and in this city? Their voters, I challenge any of those who blocked SJR 87 and SJR 1, bring me 5 residents who think murderers should be out on the street. Bring me 5 voters who say that illegal immigrants should be out on the street to kill little girls.
We know that a few people may have been saved. That's true. Then why not do it for everything? Why not lock up all people accused of crimes indefinitely for fear that they may do something? I guarantee a handful of lives will be saved by doing that too. But at what cost? The cost of our liberty.
There was a litmus test for every elected member in the Texas Capitol this session. Do they stand for and fight for the citizens in their district or the criminals who kill them? Many passed that test. Some of them failed that test. Those who failed that test will face their own reckoning.
A lot of folks are going to be tied up in this that will be members of my community, refusing to accept that this kind of legislation is a continued attack on the minority community and all communities of color and our communities, where racial profiling is a reality, where a young man may get pulled or may get stopped just simply for jogging and not carrying his ID. And I can say that it offends me because this has happened to my own son.
And we will not stop in the Senate. I know the governor will not stop until we pass SJR 1 and SJR 87, whether it's in a special session or the next session.
You can be assured that those other proposals, as Schwarzenegger would say, they're going to be back. And we are not done yet.
Boy, a lot of verbal hand grenades thrown there. Democrats have certainly been called out before by Republican leaders, especially after some of the quorum-breaking walkouts they've done in the past. But, Stephen, Tuesday was a little different. Strongest post-session call-out I've ever seen. And this one may have some teeth to it because it's linked to neighborhood crime. You agree?
To a certain extent. And I'll say this. Now, yes, there is an issue, and, and Governor Abbott touched on that in that press conference on Tuesday, talking about this has become a revolving door and it's resulted in real people losing their lives. But let's also not lose sight of the biggest part of what he actually signed there and what will go to voters in November. It's not like Democrats didn't approve something overwhelmingly, in fact, SJR 5, that will make a huge change in allowing mandating judges to deny bond for people accused of certain violent crimes. Yes, people who are undocumented, some of them are in this country and committing violent crimes, and that will maybe be addressed in the next session. I just think the call out by the lieutenant governor was a bit much, seeing as a huge part of this reform package did pass. That's just my take.
Dan Patrick being over the top. Oh, right. He really closed it one out, go way over the top. Mark, in your research, there are signs that the escalating crime problem is gaining traction as a ballot box issue in strong blue districts. Do you see anything in that in your research?
We definitely see it here in Harris County. The UH Hobby School has done several surveys looking at this exact topic and finds that crime is one of the top priorities for Harris County residents. And we actually saw back in the 2024 election where Republicans actually did much better than was expected, in part based on a campaign that focused almost exclusively on Democratic judges, at least as they alleged, releasing people onto the streets who had committed violent crimes, who in turn committed additional violent crimes. And I think in terms of SJR 1 for Democrats, one of the things that they're going to be really hoping for between now and November of 2026 is that there isn't an undocumented immigrant who's out on bail who commits a violent crime, because if so, we're going to be hearing about it throughout the campaign season.
Oh boy, are we going to hear about it. And if it happens early, boy, could it cause something, a special session? We heard the threat, it was dangled out there, but who knows? It wouldn't surprise to see, for me to see the governor wait, maybe even let the midterm elections play out first. But Stephen, a bail reboot could also be attached to something else for an early special. And I'm hearing some say that that early special could be redistricting. What do you think?
Governor Abbott got a lot of wins this session. This session is totally different than any session that I've been a part of since I've been here, which is not as long as you or Mark Jones. But Governor Abbott got a lot of wins. And so he's going to have to internally weigh, is it worth calling lawmakers back, and will there be the same result that happened this session? And so he has to weigh that. And the biggest pressure on him right now is Senate Bill 3, that THC bill. As of this taping, he has not made a decision on it. And so I think he's going to weigh his options. I really don't see a special session happening.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have a lot of polling going on and a lot of vote counting going on before a special is called. But Mark, if it's not bail reform part 2, what do you think could actually trigger a special session?
I think at this point, the governor, as we all mentioned, had so many wins this session that there are probably more liabilities than gains for calling a special session, because one of the difficulties is if you call a special session, you're going to get pressure from all sorts of groups to put their pet agenda items on, and you may not want those agenda items actually to be passed before the 2026 election. And the failure, for instance, of the legislation that would have placed restrictions on abortion medications shipped from outside of the state is a good example. That's one that while Republicans voted for it in the Senate, or not so much in the Senate, that voted for it out of committee, they didn't necessarily want it to pass, because had it passed, that could have been used by Democrats against Republicans in the 2026 election. So I think for the governor right now, he's likely to effectively say, no special session. The one caveat could be there if he does decide to veto SB 3. I don't think he will, but if he does, then he'd almost be forced to call a special session, because of right now you would have the unregulated industry that would continue to operate for 2 years without a special session, which I don't think anyone across the aisles wants to see happen.
And of course, we're going to be expecting the governor to announce about running for re-election. What were you going to say, Stephen? Sorry.
No, I agree with Mark on that part when it comes to Senate Bill 3, as far as if the governor personally feels, or professional, whatever you want to call it, feels that an all-out ban is not needed, then he's going to have to save face from some of the backlash and call lawmakers back to put more guardrails on it. So we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. So when we come back, we've got issues. Find out what they are. All right, we've got issues, and Rudy, I'm gonna warn you, this one's gonna be left field for me. There are as of this taping, two escaped inmates that are still on the run from New Orleans. And one took to social media. Now, I don't want to judge someone about what their mental capacity may be, but if you run away from the law, maybe let's not get on social media and do a whole video. They still haven't found this guy. He has a history of escaping. I'm not trying to advocate for someone escaping, but if you made it out, it's not smart to post a video on social media. That's my issue. Rudy, what is your issue?
I don't know. I thought that was kind of a smart move just to show, I'm not as bad as they say I am. Help me, Trump. Help me, Trump.
He asked help from Trump for a state charge, so I don't know how that works, but okay.
It's almost a Diddy move along that line.
Wow.
I could almost go with Sean Diddy as my issue, but that one's just so bizarre. I'm going to go to something a little bit more local and a valid concern. And people, listen to me and listen to me good. We got some extra rain here in Central Texas, and that means our lakes and our rivers are flowing again, and that means all those inner tube people are going to be out there floating and clogging up our rivers. We need some traffic control on the Guadalupe and the Camal. Lord help us. It's going to be a busy weekend and going into next week with all this water flowing down the rivers for the first time in 2 or 3 years. Oh, you think the traffic congestion's bad on I-35 now? Lord have mercy. We're going to need bumpers or little train things to get through the congestion on the Camal. That's my issue. It's going to get ugly. Ugly, Stephen.
All right. Okay, that's all the time we have. To see this episode and any of our past ones, go to our station's YouTube channels.
You can also keep the conversation going if you really want to on our social media sites. And, don't forget, let us know what you think the issue is. And we're going to be looking ahead to some of the fallout from this session and our next session of The Issue Is. See you then.